Way too early for that. He's obviously going to play the dress rehearsal game, so we're going to see more than we saw in Game 2. Whether that means as little as 2 drives or something like that, or if it's the typical Week 3 preseason, which is you play at least through halftime and then the first drive of the third quarter. But as we all know, Chip Kelly doesn't always do things in the typical fashion. So, he's going to speak tomorrow, the head coach, and I doubt he gives us anything then, to be blunt, because that's usually his MO. But he's got to play. He's got to get some reps, and this is a very, very important step for him. He passed the first step with flying colors, and it goes on today. I would say the most positive thing today was it was a padded practice, and Sam came out. We're not allowed to watch the actual practice at this point, just the first 20 minutes or so of individual drills. But he didn't have a knee brace on, didn't have a sleeve, so obviously he's feeling pretty confident in the knee, and that's a positive.
John, obviously, you mentioned that he's obviously going to play, and I think most people think that he'll play. I kind of said earlier, the way Chip Kelly said it the other day, hey, we wanted to get him, 15 plays. He got 14, and that was sufficient. Do you think it's more of a set number of plays more so than we want to see you play a half? Meaning, if he gets 20 plays in the first quarter and 5 in the second quarter, and they scripted 25 plays for him, is that all we see of him?
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, every coach thinks that way, and, you kind of in the preseason, no matter who the quarterback is, you might draw it up as you want to see him for 15 plays. And if you have a long drive, you might say, okay, let's pull him, and that's what the Eagles did. Whereas if you're 3 and out, all of a sudden you might play well into the second quarter. So the fact that the Eagles were successful at the end of the day and they scored an actual touchdown with Sam Bradford kind of curtailed the time they had him out there. And part of it was the hits, let's be honest.
Yep.
He took two really, and I would argue the second one from Williams to nose tackle was far more devastating because that was straight in the sternum, and he almost pow drove him to the ground and into his shoulder. That could have been a disaster, but he shook it off, and he's healthy and he feels good, and that part of it is what the Eagles were looking for, and they got through that, and it's important. But now, as I said, this is the dress rehearsal. We have to see more. How much more? I would like to see him play in the third quarter. I obviously I don't know if that's Chip Kelly's thinking, but I think that's a lot of people want to see if this guy has what it takes as far as playing 60 minutes of football. Because it's one thing to play 13 plays. It's wholly another to go out there for an entire football game.
No doubt. And he looked a little rusty. I mean, he threw high a couple of times just to go 3 of 5 and call it a preseason, but there's so many guys, key players getting injured around the league. It's almost like these teams feel like, man, I don't really want to put him out there. I'll just try to skate through and get him to the opener. But it seems like the Eagles just can't do that with him. They have to get him more time.
No, they can't, and I understand the frustration, and it happens throughout the league, and you see these ACL injuries, specifically Orlando Scandrick, the latest for Dallas, and but the thing you have to understand as a coach, you can't legislate injuries. It doesn't matter. Half of these ACLs, not in Scandrick's case, but in a number of the other ones, happen on non-contact plays anyway. So, it feels a little bit better if you lose a key player in a game that counts as opposed to one that doesn't. But at the end of the day, an injury is an injury, and you can't really do anything about it. You can't coach that way. You can't coach scared. And I think Chip Kelly realizes that. And he even talked about it. We can't put Sam Bradford in a glass case was, I think, his quote.
Yep.
So he understands. I mean, he's got to go out and play football.
John, Pat Shurmur spoke today, and everybody keeps asking him, and I thought the quote that he gave, the unintended consequence of being hit, is that you see how he handled it. It looks like the Eagles are taking the positive of him getting hit, saying, look, whether it was a legal hit, a low hit, or whatever, it was a hit that he got up from, and that's what we're encouraged by.
Yeah, I think that's the right tack to take. I think he makes a good point, and he's using it as a teaching tool, both in the the mechanics of that particular play and the body language, because they've talked about that. Sam's got to protect himself more in that realm. And the fact that they learned something about Sam Bradford, because everyone was holding their breath. I mean, you could sense it at Lincoln Financial Field. As soon as the hit came, you could hear everyone kind of murmur and wait to see if this guy was going to get back up. And the fact that he did, is a positive development. So you never want your quarterbacks hit like that, or the Williams hit for that matter. But the positive, the unintended consequence, as Shermer said, is he took it, and he took it like a champ, and he got back up, and he scored a touchdown.
Hey, why do you think they are holding back on announcing Gardner as the guy? You would think that they would want to have a guy in place and get those guys the reps. Now, whether they're giving them those type of reps at practice or not, obviously I don't know. I'm not there, and you guys can't see. But why not say, look, Andrew Gardner is our right guard, and those 5 guys are going to practice, as the starters together?
It's interesting. I don't know. I mean, Shermer came very close today. I mean, everybody knows he's the starter because when we were allowed to see all the practice, he was taking, all the reps with the first team at the end, and he's done it in the first 2 preseason games. So, it's the worst kept secret in the world. My only guess would be that they're trying to keep the fire lit under Gardner and say, don't rest on your laurels, keep improving. He's a journeyman to begin with, so I don't think that would be a problem. He's not going to just kick up his feet and say, I'm going to stop working. But, everybody knows he's a starter, and why they won't admit it is a bit of a mystery.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out McMullen's camp coverage in the trending bar up top. How about Alan Barber? He's a guy that just was kind of handed the position. We saw Evan Mathis sign with Denver the other day. Is that spot a concern, or do you think Alan Barbery is a lateral move at that position?
Well, I think it's a lateral move when you compare him to Evan. The Eagles as a whole aren't concerned with that position. And a lot of it is, the fact you haven't heard a lot about Alan Barber in this training camp, and now that it's ended and we're in the regular practices, is because the Eagles are so happy with him. He's one of the guys that is, a counted upon starter, unlike Gardner, who they won't admit it. I mean, he's entrenched. And they have a lot of confidence in him as a player, and they finally talked about it a bit today because Mathis signed, so it sort of brought back all those old memories. And Shermer was raving about the chemistry he has with Jason Peters and Jason Kelsey. And I also got a chance to talk to Kelsey in the locker room, and he talked about that. He said, because you have to think about it from Jason Kelsey's standpoint. He's got 2 new guys on both sides of him. So chemistry is an issue with him, but he made the point that while they might be new starters, they're not really new with him. He's played a lot with them before because Mathis and Hermans both had injuries last year. So he's very confident. And the thing that speaks most about Alan Barber is no one even questions him on this coaching staff. They just expect him to play at a high level, and they're very happy with him.
And that's interesting, too, because, he played very briefly last year. He's kind of coming off injury. That hasn't been discussed a lot either, that, this guy doesn't have a lot of experience, specifically as a starter. He, too, was kind of a journeyman. They got 2 journeymen offensive guards, and we're supposed to feel like, they can handle it.
Yeah, but, I will say this. It is guard. It's not tackle. They're very, very stacked at the tackle position, which generally is more important, obviously. And they have a Pro Bowl level center. And, the Eagles will argue that Evan Mathis was a journeyman before he got to Philadelphia. And they make a good point because he was. And maybe part of the success of a player like that is the fact that he gets to play next to Jason Peters, who certainly is among the top 2 or 3 left tackles in football. He gets to play, next to Jason Kelsey, who's a top-tier center. And they think some of that same mojo, so to speak, is going to go to Alan Barber, and he's going to play, if not just as well, very close to what they had out of Evan Mathis.
John, how about Jordan Matthews? I know yesterday you had said about him playing in the slot, and I know last year Chip Kelly kind of indicated, well, he's a rookie, we don't want to put more on his plate, but he was asked, that being Pat Shurmur today, about the size mismatches inside last year, and if he expected teams to adjust to him. Do you think at some point they do bounce him to the outside, or do they strictly only look at him as a slot guy?
Well, that's interesting. That's one of the more interesting things that came out of Shurmur's press conference today, because he mentioned that Matthews has worked some outside. We have not seen that to this point. In every practice that has been open, he has worked strictly in the slot. In the preseason games, he's worked strictly in the slot. So I'm not sure if that's to come and they understand that it's time to start moving this guy around, because you know, he's their best receiver, and it's not close. And as I said, when you keep a guy in one particular position on the field, think about it from the opposing defensive coordinator's mindset. You've just made things much easier for that defensive coordinator, because he knows where Matthews is going to be on every single play, and he can adjust his defense accordingly. Whereas the truly great receivers, you try to move them around, you try to get mismatches. And I think the Eagles have to start getting to that mentality with Matthews. And maybe, as Shurmur kind of intimated, maybe they're getting to that point.
You know, it's interesting. I was talking the last hour, John, before you came on, about which team after 2 weeks of the preseason. Now, I'm not taking stock into the scores or anything, but we didn't know what Nelson Aguilar was going to look like, or I watch him now and say, this guy can be a competent NFL player. He looks like he can handle himself. He looks like he belongs. With that, you know, do they just say, look, we like Aguilar enough that we think with him there and Matthews on the inside that's a very tall task for teams to kind of match up against?
Yeah, I mean, he's got talent. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, rookies are going to have some issues. And Malcolm Jenkins kind of spoke today about Aguilar having, you know, his biggest difficulty to this point had been with the timing stuff. And he's obviously got the great athleticism, but this isn't college. You're going to have very, very small windows to get open. And a lot of that is based on timing routes. And he's starting to learn that kind of stuff. So he's still got a ways to go, but Pat Shurmur today talked about at some point it comes down to making plays. You could run the best route in the world, but guys have to be able to make plays, and that's what he has. He can make something out of nothing. You saw it in the first preseason game where it kind of made the great catch on a bad throw from Mark Sanchez, put his foot in the ground, and he was gone. And you can't teach that kind of stuff. So that's what he has. And I think eventually he's going to be a very good NFL player. It's going to take a while, though. It's very difficult for rookies to dominate in this league. I don't expect him to dominate at all, but he's going to be competent early in his career, and I think he has a chance to be very good down the line.
Agree with that. I want to get your thoughts on Austin. What kind of contribution, what is his role on this team? I mean, it sounds like everybody thinks he's going to make it. He's been hurt himself. What does Pat Shurmur have to say about Miles Austin?
Well, you know, everybody talks about his veteran leadership and you know, that on the field and in the locker room, how much success he's had in this league in the past. He knows how to get open, is how Pat Shurmur described it. So he's not what he was when he was, you know, having those big seasons in Dallas and making all the big plays. He's more of a possession receiver now. But I think they understand what he brings to this team in the fact that you have a lot of talent at that position, but it's all young. And Matthews, as we said, he's in his second year. People forget that. Aguilar's a rookie. Josh Huff's only in his second year, and he didn't play really that much wide receiver last season. So there's a lot of question marks at that position, and they like the fact that they have a veteran guy that they know if they need him on Sunday, he's going to be able to do it, and he's going to be able to do it at a fairly high level.
Yeah, and obviously that's an interesting – I think the wide receiver spot's interesting because it's almost like they feel compelled to play Cooper because of the blocking, but there's better options elsewhere. And then, of course, you got this guy, you know, with Miles Austin where he's almost like the Jeff Francoeur of the Eagles, where you like his veteran leadership, and he might actually give you something. Who knows? But like you said, they seem like they got guys locked in this. I really am interested to see how they evolve at that position over the course of the year.
Yeah, and I've said it before. I do not like the fact that they lock in Matthews in the slot, and maybe that's changing, and maybe we'll see something different when we get to the regular season and everything's not so vanilla. But
yeah,
if they continue toward that path and just use him in one strictly position, I mean, to me, that's a disservice to your own offense, because he's your best receiver, and you have to do everything possible to make him have the biggest impact on the game. And you're right about Riley Cooper. There's a frustration. He's probably, as a receiver, catching the football, he's probably the fifth best receiver on this team. But they love his blocking so much, and it's so important to what they do as far as the zone read, even though they don't run much of the zone read, wink, wink. It's so important to what they do. They want him out there.
John, that's you write nationally for today's pigskin.com. I want to read off or go over a couple things. First off, let's start with Dallas and what happens there with Scandrick. How big of a blow is that to them?
Huge blow. I mean, that's not the strength of their team to begin with. Their defense, it's a talent, starved unit, and he's by far their best corner. And I think Dallas has to, take a different mode now, and they have to look more towards the pass rush to sort of make up for some deficiencies on the back end. They have potential to be very good on the pass rush, especially when Greg Hardy gets on the football field, and who knows what Randy Gregory's going to be. If he can turn into what his athleticism says he could be, all of a sudden that defense, that pass rush could make up for some of those deficiencies on the back end, and I think that's the way they have to look now.
John, let's look at Dallas in a couple other spots here. They got Scandrick out. Hardy, McLean also probably going to miss some time. They drafted Randy Gregory. Overall on that defense, we thought they would be historically a terrible defense last year. That didn't end up being the case. What do you make on that side of the ball? Are they a better defensive team this year than they were last year?
Well, a lot of their success in the fact that they were better, and I voted for Rod Marinelli as assistant coach of the year in the Pro Football Writers Award. That's how good of a job I think he did with a unit that didn't have a lot of talent. But also part of the perceived success, or at least more success than we all thought Dallas would have on the defensive side, was the fact that they became a run-first team with DeMarco Murray. Now they don't have that. And all of a sudden, that time of possession, which isn't that big of a deal, say, here in Philadelphia, it was a huge deal for Dallas. So that's a concern, too, because you don't want this group on the field a lot. There's still talent issues. It's improved. Hardy's a great player when he gets there. Sean Lee, if he can come back from the injury, is a really, really solid player. But as a whole, there's not a ton of talent on that side of the ball in Dallas.
The NFC just got a big opening with Jordy Nelson going out. How wide open is the NFC?
It's pretty wide open. That's a huge injury. I think that's the biggest injury of the preseason. I don't think a lot of people know, but Jordy Nelson was probably the best all-around wide receiver in football last year. As far as being able to do everything, this is a guy who can move the change. He's very big, 6'3", possession receiver. He goes over the top. He can beat anybody deep, and he has this tremendous chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. I don't think I've ever seen the back shoulder fade thrown better than between those two players, ever. That's how good they were. So we all know that Rodgers is going to make somebody a star. It might be Devontae Adams. It might be Jeff Janis. Somebody's going to come up and become a star. But they're not going to be Jordy Nelson. And there's a fine line in this league from being a Super Bowl contender and a good team. And I think this injury pushes the Packers back on the wrong side of that line.
All right, from the teams that, the wide open for the best teams, would you put Washington in the race for one of the worst? To me, that team just has so much dysfunction. It seems like every day there's something else coming out of there that makes you scratch your head.
Yeah, it's a disaster. I don't think Washington has any chance to do anything until they move on in one direction. They have to choose between the coach and the quarterback. And that's the bottom line, because the coach doesn't like the quarterback. He thinks Kirk Cousins would be a better option. He thinks Colt McCoy would be a better option. He may be right, but the owner still believes RG3 is the face of the franchise and won't let him go in that direction. So, if you're the owner, if you're Daniel Snyder, you feel that way, fine, but then move on from Jake Gruden. It does no good to have a head coach who doesn't want to play the quarterback, dislikes the way he plays the game, and you can see it in the way Gruden acts. It's just a terrible situation, and I don't think they have any chance to do anything until they move on from at least one of those two entities.
John McMullen, today's pigskin for his national stuff, 97.3 ESPN.com for all his Eagles camp coverage. 2 weeks into the preseason, John, any changes in your NFC East rankings?
No, I still think it's a two-horse race between the Eagles and the Cowboys as far as the division. I don't think it's a very good division as a whole. I think, the Giants have some of the same issues they've had for the past 2 years. Offensive line is bad, and they've already lost Will Beatty for a significant portion of the year, so it's going to continue to be bad. They might have the worst safety situation in all of football, so the back seven continues to be poor. We just talked about Washington. So I think it's a two-horse race, and I give it, they're the defending champions, but the big thing with them is how do you replace DeMarco Murray? And to say Joseph Randle will be able to run for 1,800 yards, I got to see that before I believe it.
He's John McMullen over at 97.3 ESPN.com with a couple stories up there today. And, of course, all throughout camp and the Eagles season as they get ready to take on the Packers. It's their first road trip of the 2015 preseason at Lambeau Saturday night on 97.3. Thanks, John.